Photoshop course and this new section on the layer panel. We're going to do a quick deep dive into this layer panel, and by the end of this section you'll be actually working and finishing your own project using these assets. So again, if you have them downloaded, I'm using the project 1 resizing and placing layers project. If you're using an older version of Photoshop and if you're not able to open this project file for some reason, go to the photos and you can actually just start a new project and import the images. The best way to do that is just opening the background in Photoshop like so. Just right click and open it in Photoshop, and then what we're going to do is just drag and drop all of the PNG layers, which are already selected sort of cutouts of all of these different assets. I'm selecting all of them, tabbing over to Photoshop, and then just placing them in here. So either way, I just want to let you know, if you for some reason are having trouble opening the original project file, you can start one from scratch yourself. So you've seen this as we've started this layer panel. And this is just all of the different assets that you add or create within Photoshop. They are ordered in the way that they are sort of placed on top of each other. So for example, the bird, if I move it around, is above the boy or this girl, whoever this is, the kid facing away. The elephant is behind these three, and all of these are in front of our background. You can drag these layers up and down to move them around if you want. One other quick thing to note is if you are having trouble selecting a specific layer, depending on the project you're working on, it may be because this is unchecked, auto select, and you want to have it on layer instead of group. And if you're not seeing the sort of boundary box or the bounding box with these handles, it's because of this show transform controls is off as well. So you might be like clicking around and trying to resize, but you don't know how to do that, or it's not showing up. Just click that show transform controls. Got it? So the cool thing about the layer panel is there is so much you can do in here. For each layer, there's a lot of different properties that you can get into. A couple of the main ones are the opacity right here. So let's take our little elephant, and you can adjust these in multiple ways. One is by clicking the drop down and dropping down the opacity. So opacity is how opaque it is, how transparent it is. So the higher the opacity means the less transparent. There's also these blending modes, which we'll dive into in a future lesson, but you can automatically start to see how you can create some cool sort of stylized graphics using these blending modes. It's basically a way to blend multiple images or whatever one you're selecting and changing the blending mode with whatever's in the foreground or really the background. You have these properties for each layer. So for example, if you hover over these, it shows you lock transparent pixels, lock image pixels, lock position, prevent auto nesting into and out of artboards and frames, lock all. So if you click lock all, it means that I can't click or select the elephant at all. I can click everything else. You see this little lock icon up here next to the elephant, and even if I click the elephant layer, I can't do anything to it. And that's good if you're done with a layer or you just don't want to mess with it. Sometimes you're working on a project and there's so many layers that are kind of close to each other, and you have trouble clicking the proper one. It's a good idea to know that you can just quickly lock it. These other ones are more specific to a specific type of locking. For example, you might want to lock the position, but still be able to edit things like the transparency or things like that. So see, we lock the position, but we can still drop the opacity with just the lock position on. A couple of these other ones we'll get into probably later in the course. But for now, it's mostly just knowing that you can lock it is a good idea. And then you can also turn on and off this layer with this little eyeball next to the layer. And that's just making it sort of disappearing it for now or making it invisible. So if for some reason we're working on something in the background, but we don't want to get rid of this layer, we can just turn it off so we can see the background. You see this fill percentage? This has to do more with paths, shapes, or text that you're creating. I'm going to go ahead and jump and really quickly show you what happens if I select our shape tool, which has a number of shapes, but the primary one is the rectangle tool. These options up here will probably look different for you, but you basically have a fill, which is the color inside the shape. You have a stroke, which is the color on the outside. And so if I click and drag and create a rectangle like so, and then we drop our fill, it's going to drop the inside of the opacity of the inside fill color, but the outside stroke color, which is this yellow, and if I boost the size of that a lot more, you can kind of really see it. It's not going to drop the opacity of that. We're going to dive into shape layers in the future, but I just wanted to show you what that fill percentage is. If you're using an image like a photo without an edge, which is something you can do, you can create a stroke or an edge around these images, and you drop the fill, it's basically just going to be the same as this opacity slider up here. Also notice that when I created a new layer, or that rectangle shape, it created this new layer. Cool, huh? So now you know if you create any sort of new shape, it's going to add it to your layers. To delete a layer, which I'm going to do is just select that layer, press the delete key on your keyboard. I'm going to undo that, or just click this trash can down at the bottom. I'm going to say don't show again because I don't care. If I click that, I want to delete it without being reminded that I'm deleting it. So that's pretty much a good precursor intro to the layer panel. We're going to dive into some other things like grouping and some of these other options down here. The layer panel is something you're going to be working in a lot, and don't get too, I guess, daunted by it because there's so much going on. It's something that you'll get more and more comfortable with as you work on. And even I feel like there's so many things in Photoshop, and you right click an object and you see all these different options, and some things I still don't even know. And I've been using Photoshop for over a decade. So don't get daunted, keep with it, and we'll just keep going. Favorite tools to use or options with layers is the alignment options. So if you click one layer, you won't really have these alignment options available. They're sort of faded out. And whenever you see something that's faded out, it means that it's not available for you at this time. But if we select multiple layers, which you can do by shift clicking the next layer, or say you click the bottom one and shift click the top one, it selects all of those in that series that are between the first click and the second click. Or you can select specific ones by clicking one and then command clicking on a Mac, control on a PC, the other layers that you want. So if I want to select all of these, I select all of them. And then you see that we have these alignment tools up here. So these are pretty self-explanatory once you've sort of used them, but I'm going to just go through them really quickly. So if you align left edges, it's going to align the left edge of all of these images on the left side. So see how they've all been bumped to the left side. The reason why the bird is not on the left side is because this is a PNG image where even though it's transparent on the left-hand side, that still is the edge. So the edge isn't specifically the edge of the beak, it's the edge of the file itself. I hope that makes sense. So center align, going to put everything in the center, or the center of it's going to center everything together. Notice that it doesn't center everything to the canvas. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And then right, we'll put it on the right. I'm going to skip this one right here, distribute vertically, and just show you can align it to the top, align it to the bottom, align it to the center. So that's just a quick way to align multiple layers. This might be a little bit more helpful when you're creating things like logos or using text and you want to align them to, the exact center of an image or things like that. These other ones are pretty interesting too. So distribute vertically or distribute horizontally. I'm going to move these layers apart. And say we have these two layers, the elephant and the bird on the left-hand side, and then the kid on the right-hand side. If we say distribute horizontally, what it's going to do is going to put them equidistantly apart from each other. So it's a little bit harder to see because these aren't like perfect squares. If we want to see it a little bit better, let me just turn these off. We're going to choose our ellipse tool, and we're just going to create a quick circle. So to do that, I'm just going to hold down the Shift button when using the ellipse tool, and it creates a perfect circle. Now, to create a new version of this or copy it, you can do multiple things. You can press Command C to copy and then Command V to paste, or you can press the Option key with the Move tool and then click and drag to create a new copy. Similar to how we created the new artboard, if you watched that lesson, the Option key allows you to duplicate layers just by clicking a layer and dragging it. So now we have these circles. So let's say we have our circles kind of all over the place, but we want to align them horizontally. What we can do is, and space them out evenly, we can do this. And then also, if we want them in a row, what we would do is this. Does that make sense? Distribute horizontally so they're evenly spaced, left to right, and then we put them in a row. Now let's just move them back again and say we want them in a row vertical in sort of an evenly distributed line. So first I'll do the opposite in the steps. We're going to align horizontal centers and then distribute evenly. So this is going to come in handy when you're creating more intricate graphics, logos, that kind of thing, where you have multiple little icons or infographic type things where you have specific images. I've used this, I've done this when I create sort of grids for photo projects. And let me just show you that really quickly. Actually, I have in my pictures, we have our Christmas card from this year. So I used that same technique to create these little squares, and then I use those alignment tools to create this grid. So that's how you would do that without kind of meticulously going through and zooming in and trying to match it up yourself by your eye. You can do that quickly with these alignment tools. Now, before I let you go, there are some more options that I want to show you, and specifically how you can actually align things quickly to the canvas itself and not to just the layers. The easiest way to do this is, say we have one selected. If you click this dot, 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 if you don't see more options up here, if you click dot, 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 you see there's actually more options. You have more options for distributing the layers. Earlier, it was distributing by the center, but you can also distribute by the top or the bottom or the center of the frame. To distribute or to align to the canvas itself, there's this align to option, so select canvas. And now if we get out of this and we just select one of these layers and click the align, it's going to align everything or that layer to the center. So if we select all of these, for example, and we click align, it's going to align all of them, to the center like so. So now everything is aligned to the center of our options. With layers is the alignment options. So if you click one layer, you won't really have these alignment options available. They're sort of faded out. And whenever you see something that's faded out, it means that it's not available for you at this time. But if we select multiple layers, which you can do by shift clicking the next layer, or say you click the bottom one and shift click the top one, it selects all of those in that series that are between the first click and the second click. Or say we have the, now before I let you go, there are some more options that I want to show you, and specifically how you can actually align things quickly to the canvas itself and not to just the layers. The easiest way to do in this video, I want to go over some basic layer panel organization tips. So if you're working on a project with hundreds of layers, which can be possible, there are going to be times where you are scrolling through your layers and you wish it was more organized. So there's a few different things that you can do to organize. The first is groups. So if you click this little file folder button, it creates a group. And then you can put layers into that group. So say we select all of our little images, except for our background, we can hover over this group and you see that it kind of becomes a little indented, and that means it's within this folder. We can toggle this down so it kind of collapses that, and now it is all in one group and it's a lot cleaner. You can copy and paste. So I just press the Command C and Command V to copy that group. You can also drag this group into this plus button, and you can do that either with a group or a layer. So say I take this background layer, we drag it into the plus sign. Now we have two backgrounds. That's just another quick way to duplicate any sort of layer rather than like a copy paste or the option key that I mentioned. So now we have these two groups, and if we move one up, and you'll notice that when I clicked and tried to move the group, it just selected that kid. Do you remember why that is? It's because up here in our move tool, we have auto select set to layer instead of group. So if you're working with a lot of groups, you might want to set that to group. And so now if I click one item, it moves all of them, okay? So that's just a quick thing to note. Another thing you can do is merge layers. So let's say you have edited these three images of the bird and the elephant in this group up here, which we can rename by double clicking and call it group 2, whatever you want. You can give it any name. You can do this with a group, or you could do it with multiple items, but I'm just going to show you with a group. If you right click and then choose convert to smart object, what it's going to do is make this object one layer, one object. Now there are different types of layers. A smart object is one that you can still resize, and you should have, of course it's limited to the quality of your image, but if you're using a vector-based graphic, which is one that you can actually scale infinitely without losing quality, with a smart object, you can scale it and you don't lose quality. There are going to be times where you're trying to do something to a layer, such as painting on it, or different things, where it won't let you do that with a smart object, and you'll need to rasterize it. Now I'm getting a little bit deep in this, and I don't want to confuse you too much, but right-clicking and then clicking rasterize layer will do that. And now this is an object that if we continue to kind of edit, let's make it really small actually, and then say, let's undo that, and it's still the smart object. Let's make it really small, and then I'm going to right click and choose rasterize layer. And then if I make it really big, again, see how it has lost the quality, and that's because we made it into a pixel perfect image, meaning those pixels are locked and rasterized. They're locked at that quality, and if you try to increase that size, it's going to lose quality. So anyways, I'm getting a little bit too deep in here because this is about organization, but these things come up as you're working with layers that I want you to know. So as you can see here, though, this is now one layer. We created that smart object and we merged them into one layer. So if you're working on, it really depends on what your graphic is. You can always sort of merge things down to stay organized. I would definitely recommend that you save one of these as a second version. So say we had this, we made our edits, we think we're good with this photo, with this group, we want to make it as a smart object. What you might want to do is create a copy, so Command C, and then make this one a smart object. And you always have your backup, which is in a group, which is easily, it's organized, and you could always even have like a separate folder of, assets or whatever you want to call it. And you could actually put folders within a folder. So create subfolders and really organize it that way. So you always have the individual assets available, but you also have your smart object that you've created and edited that you'll continue working with. To ungroup items, there's a couple ways to do it. You can just right click the group and choose ungroup layers. That deletes the group. That's probably the quickest. Or if you just want to move things out of the group, you can just click and drag them out of the group, and then you can delete the group if you're done with it. Now, there is one other way of sort of combining layers, and that's through merging. So say you have a layer or multiple layers, you can right click and choose merge layers. This doesn't create a smart object. This just keeps that keeps the layers as they were, whatever type of layer they were. And now you have this layer with multiple, or with these two objects. In that right click menu, you probably saw, I'm going to undo, there's a merge down. And so we can merge down. And what that does is it merges the top layer that you had selected with the layer below it. So if we merge down this layer now, it's going to merge into the elephant layer. And now all three of these are one layer. You can also right click and choose merge visible, and that's going to merge all of the files that are visible into one layer. I'm going to undo that. And then lastly, you have flatten image, and that's going to actually take out all of the assets that are in your canvas and actually merge it into one layer and make it the background. Now, it's a locked background. They call it a background. You can unlock this and it becomes a layer itself, but you can see that it actually adds that white background because it basically saves it as a JPEG, not really a JPEG, but saves it as an image, and it adds a background depending on what your canvas background color settings are. And that's pretty much it, where I want to leave off with organization for the layer panel. I know I went down a couple rabbit holes in this one, but I hope you follow it along, and I hope that it was beneficial to you. I know moving forward, there's going to be future lessons like this. So if there's things that are a little bit too advanced, or it's not exactly what you're looking for at the time, you are always free to skip ahead. Wherever you're watching this, there should be an option to speed up the playback so you can watch it faster, just so you can get through some of these longer lessons in a decent amount of time. Quick lesson, it's another sort of organizational technique, but also has to do with actually how you are editing your images. It's called linking. So you can actually link multiple layers to each other. It's different than a group. Because it's not actually organized as a group, but it allows you to then control those multiple layers with one sort of click or movement. So say we were actually moving these images around, making our background bigger to fill our frame. We want to press return to lock that in place or set it in place. We make our bird a little bit smaller. We put our bird on top of our elephant. And then say we want to move our elephant. We realize, oh, our elephant isn't in the right spot. But when we move that, we're going to have to move our bird too. There's an easier way to do this by linking the bird and elephant layers. So I'm going to select both of those and then click this link button. And you see this little chain link icon appears. And now if I click one of these layers, it moves the other. We can resize so we know, okay, well, the bird is proportionate to the elephant now. Maybe it's a little bit too big still, but the elephant is a little bit too small. So say we want to make our elephant a little bit bigger, something like this. It's still going to maintain the proportions and the position to the elephant for that bird. You can unlink by just clicking these multiple ones and then clicking the link button again. You can select them and then right click and go down to unlink layers. And so linking is just another quick tool for organizing, but also you actually designing in Photoshop. Cheers. Moving along these sort of bottom options, let's unlink those layers. There are a few different things down here that we're going to check out. One is this effects option. So you don't see it because the bottom of my screen is a little bit cut off. But if I scroll down, or if you open it, you can see these different sort of effects. We'll go into these in more depth in a future section, but just know that this is an option to get to these effects. You can also double click a layer, and this opens up this layer style panel, and you have these effects as well. So say we want to add a drop shadow to our elephant. It's kind of hard for you to see, but if we make this, move this over to the side, you can kind of see that our elephant now has a shadow behind it. If we turn this on and off, you can see it a little bit more, and you can adjust all the settings here as well by clicking on that option and then adjusting the settings. Now we're going to go into these in more detail later on, but that effects button is where you get access to those. We're going to skip over this layer mask button right there to the create new fill or adjustment layer button, which is the circle one. And again, if you scroll down, we used the solid color layer before, but you have all sorts of different adjustments. For example, if we go to brightness and contrast, you'll see that it adds this layer on top of the elephant layer. And so depending on what layer you had selected originally, if you create an adjustment layer, it will go above that layer. You could always move these up or down though. And then you have your options pop open for the adjustment layers. So see, we can now increase the contrast, decrease the brightness, and that's just affecting what's underneath it. So if we move this up, you can see that it's now affecting everything underneath it, depending on where it is. I often like to put the layer properties up here in this little window right here. If you have enough space, it just makes it a little bit easier to open up rather than opening up over your actual canvas. We can put it up here in front or in this tab with color, and we'll still have room for our layer panel to be a little bit bigger down here. Now I do want to show you that you can add these layer adjustments from the layer menu. So if you go layer, new adjustment layer, you'll see these options up here. It's just another way to get to them. So like always, I keep saying we're going to dive into these things later on, but I just wanted to make you aware of what these options are down here. In the next lesson, we're going to be diving into this vector mask or layer mask button, and I'll show you what that's all about. In this lesson, I'm going to show you what this layer mask or vector mask button does. So first off, I'm going to turn off or make invisible our 3 layers in the top, and we're just going to be working on this background image. So to add a layer mask, you can select that image or layer and click the layer mask, or you can just drag one of the layers into that layer mask button. Nothing happened, except we have this white sort of mask or this white box down here. So what this is saying basically is that this is a representation of this image or this canvas or layer. And wherever there's white, you will see this image. Wherever there's black, you will it will be transparent or disappear. So how do we turn this black? We're going to use a tool called the brush tool. So you can press B on your keyboard or click this brush tool and click brush. If you hover over your canvas, you can see it turns into this little circle. You can change the size of your brush up here and also the hardness, which means like the edge, if you want it to be a sort of a sharp edge or a softer feathered edge, you can do that. We'll go into this in more depth in the future, but we also have the color selected down here of our brush. So right now it's black. And so remember what I said, if we paint on black to this layer mask, make sure the layer mask is selected and not the image itself, it's going to actually make the background transparent, or the layer transparent. If we paint on white, which you can easily do by clicking this little arrow, double arrow button right here for our color selector, and now we have a white brush. And if we paint on here, it paints back. Now make sure this mode is set to normal. For me, it was set to darken, which wasn't allowing me to paint the white on. So make sure that's set to normal when you get started with this. But you can see that now I can paint on. So this is one way to kind of mask out or paint off parts of an image. The benefit of this, doing it this way, is that you can always undo this by painting back on, right? A keyboard shortcut to remember is X on your keyboard, just X itself, and that swaps between these two colors right here, black and white. Now, there might be times where you're painting on and it doesn't look right. That might be because the color is like a gray or a blue or something. And you can see if we're at gray, it's kind of a transparent. You can still kind of see it in the background. And that's because I had it about halfway between pure white and pure black. And that's going to show in the vector mask or the layer mask as about half transparent. There's other brush things up here. We can turn the smoothing up or down. Smoothing will try to make your brush strokes a little bit smoother. Flow and opacity up here will also decrease sort of the opacity. So if you want to have like a lighter, in some sort of sense, a brush stroke where you're brushing on multiple times instead of just one fell swoop of white, but just you want to paint it on or off, that's what this opacity and flow will do as well. So typically though, I'll just leave it at 100% opacity and 100% flow. So this, as I mentioned, is good because there's other ways to get rid of parts of an image. So say, let's actually just duplicate this layer. Right click duplicate, or you can just drag it into this new item button. I'm going to right click the layer mask and choose this delete layer mask. So I just have my object. What a lot of beginners do is take our eraser button. So if you press E on your keyboard, or you go to this eraser tool, you say, oh, I'm just going to erase. And here's an example where your layer isn't editable because it's a smart object and not a rasterized object, if you remember me talking about that in a previous lesson. So we're going to right click that layer and choose rasterize layer. And now it's editable with our eraser. So we're going to make this bigger. And let's turn off our background so that we can see what we're erasing. So say we're erasing this. Okay, so we're erasing the sky. This is a very bad erasing of the sky. Ooh, that's way too big. Something like this. So now that's erased, but how do we get it back? We could undo all that. I think it's time to put what you've learned into practice, and it's your first actual project. So the final project is going to be something that looks somewhat like this. You can, of course, adjust the size and the position of the elements as you see fit. Now, I will give you a couple hints here, which you can see actually that these animals actually have, and the people, the kid here and the elephant and the bird, they actually have a shadow. So you can see this shadow down below. Now, if you're watching this, you can kind of see in the layer panel what might be happening. We haven't really gone over these things yet. So super kudos to you if you could figure it out. It does have to do with something we've briefly touched upon, but I haven't actually dived into that yet. That being said, I'll be following up this video with my own sort of practice demo showing you exactly how I got to this point so you can follow along. And if you missed any part of it, I'll show you how I did it. Cool. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, if you have the project files, it's this one right here, the resizing and placing layers PSD file that you should use. And if you have messed up this project while practicing in the previous lessons, or if you just want to start from scratch, you can always go the other route of starting from scratch with the background and then importing these other layers, the PNG layers. For project one, at least my version of it, throughout this course, you're going to be working on all kinds of projects. And just like I've said in the past, in Photoshop, there's a number of ways to do pretty much anything. I'm going to show you one way, my way, that I think is the easiest. Of course, there's probably other ways that sometimes may be easier that you might find out. And the final result is also sort of up to you as the artist, as the creator, to determine what you think looks best. But I'm going to try to create something like this that I thought looked good. So the first thing first is I'm going to resize this background. So just clicking in the top right handle, holding the Option key down on my Mac, Alt on a PC. To resize this, I'm going to increase the size, move it over to the left. Now, the reason why I'm increasing the size so much is because I like seeing that tree in the background. So see that tree in the background, but we've also got our elephants that I don't necessarily want to block the view of that tree. So that's why I had to resize it big enough to not have the elephants completely cover it. Now, figuring out how big the elephants are, this is actually a little bit tough for me, but I think something like that looks pretty good. Now, compared to the elephants, I think our kid is going to be pretty small, smaller than the baby elephant. Something like this is pretty good, and I'm going to put our kid right about there. It looks like where he's looking at the elephant. Now, remember, if these transform controls, the bounding box, are confusing or kind of getting in your way, you can always just untick this box so you can kind of have a better view of what you're looking at. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is, see these little pink lines that are popping up? Photoshop is looking at your other layers and it's trying to help you align. So if we go up here, we can kind of see here's the center of the document. So that pink line, and then if we want to go down, it's kind of tough. It depends. Sometimes if there's other layers visible, it's kind of hard to get that center document. Remember, we can always go to Align to Canvas and vertically align. Oh, it looks like we're right there. Maybe that's why we didn't see it. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that those pink lines that you're seeing, it's to help you align your layers with other layers and also with the canvas itself. Now our bird, definitely a little bit too big. Let's turn on our transform controls. We're gonna put this bird riding on our elephant like so. Should we put it on the baby elephant this time? Maybe we'll put it on the baby elephant. I think on my original I had it on, I had it up above. I can already see that my elephants are a little bit bigger than last time, and that's fine. Sometimes looking at projects a second time helps you get a better view. I actually like that. I like how the bird shows up there. Now, the lighting of these images doesn't completely match, and that's why this photo doesn't look completely natural. You can see, looking at this elephant and the bird, that the light would actually be coming from our direction, where you're looking from. So like on the not the back side where the sun is, but the front side where you are looking at the bird. And so that's why this doesn't look completely natural. And that's just something to keep in mind when you are creating these photo composites, which is what this is. So if you hear that term photo composite or Photoshop compositing, that's what this is, creating a new image out of multiple images. But just as I was mentioning, lighting plays a big part in a composite image looking more natural. So this might be a case for picking a different background actually. I already did a little bit of editing to the colors to make the colors, tone, and the lighting of these layers a little bit warmer to match the sunset that's happening in this background image, but that was something that I just did myself, which you'll learn how to do in a future lesson. So this is looking pretty good, but one thing that I do think would make it look even more natural is a shadow. So there are different ways to do this, but one of the easiest ways is just to create a copy of our main sort of layer or the person we want to have shadow for and turn that into like a black shadow basically. So how do we do that? You can, if you remember how you duplicate a layer, you can just copy and paste it, but to copy it in its place, we want to drag it into the new layer bin or button. If I went copy and then paste, see how it pastes it in a new area? Or you can also right click and say duplicate layer and it'll save right there as well. But either way, duplicate this layer. We're going to take the top layer and we kind of saw this before, but this effects, and we're actually going to do color overlay. Or if you don't do that effects button, you can just double click. Remember we saw this? And when you do this, it has a color selected and we're going to make it black, okay? Next, what we're going to do is actually bend it or warp it so that the shadow is on the front side of the elephant. So how do we do that? We can press the Command key on a Mac or Control key on a PC and grab that handle that's in the middle of the top bounding box and just drag it down. So we're going to drag it down something like this to where you think the shadow would be. Actually, to match the background, I see the tree. See how this tree is creating the shadow kind of to the left? We're going to do it like that. And then we just want to move it up just a little bit so that it is touching the feet of the elephant. And we're going to drag this layer below the elephant copy. Now, because this doesn't look so good, we're going to actually drop the opacity of this to, let's say, something like 25. That's looking pretty good. Maybe boost it up to like 35. Now a shadow though isn't going to have these hard edges. So what do we need to do to this? Add some sort of blurry edge. So how would we actually blur this? I'm going to be jumping ahead to something that we haven't touched upon, but Photoshop has a ton of cool filters. So if you have a layer selected and go up to the filter menu, you have these different menus, sub-menus for different types of filters. And one is a blur menu. I'm going to use the Gaussian blur, which is kind of a nice, kind of typical blur that blurs things evenly in sort of a natural type of blur. And you can kind of see a preview if you have the preview button checked on the screen to see what it looks like by increasing the pixels. So something like 47 or so, for me at least, looks pretty good. So that's something that we haven't touched upon, but a quick trick that hopefully will help you out in any future projects. Now let's do that really quickly for the kid. So we drag it into a new layer. We can actually go ahead and drop this layer beneath the kid. We're going to double click it, give it a color overlay, and this actually will match the previous color overlay you did. So it's already on black now instead of white, how it was. Now we can't see it because it's behind the kid layer, but if we press Command and we drag that top bounding box down, match sort of the angle, and you can see there's a specific degree that we are angling it at, and I don't remember what the other one was, but if you want to be perfectly precise, you can kind of make a note of that. So there we have that. We're going to drop the opacity to the same. It was 35%, and then filter, blur, Gaussian blur. it's going to remember the same settings that we previously used, and you want to use the same just to make it match, and that looks pretty good. Now, just to organize this, what I'm going to do is double click the shadow or the second copy and call it kid shadow, elephant copy, elephant shadow. I'm also going to link these layers. I'm going to link the elephant layers. I'm going to link the kid layer. And I'm going to put the bird above the elephant, but also link the layer to that main elephant. So now if we move our elephant, our shadow, and our bird move, we can also resize it and everything's going to move with it. Our kid will move as well. And you kind of, I don't know if you noticed what I did, but I resized this, and then when I tried to click off of it, I can't until you place it. And I just did that naturally, but you'll notice that if you're like, oh wow, I have this selected now and I can't click off of it to another layer unless I click in the layer panel, you actually have to place it using the return key on your keyboard, just like when you were placing an image in a project for the very first time. And again, that happens when you resize a layer. So return, now I can go ahead and click my kid. And I think that looks pretty good. Our background, maybe we'll move it over just slightly. I love that tree, and I don't want it to be too covered up. Now this looks a little bit different than our other final version. Yeah, actually pretty different, but I still like it. So what do you think? Where did you get